Welcome to Jeffrey Epstein Files. In many high-profile legal cases, one of the most striking visual elements in released documents is the presence of redactions, blacked-out sections that conceal portions of the text. These redactions are not random. They are deliberate, structured, and governed by specific legal principles. At first glance, redactions may appear as simple omissions. But in reality, they represent a controlled form of disclosure. When a document is released to the public, it is often not the original version. Instead, it is a reviewed and modified copy, where certain information has been removed or obscured according to legal requirements. This raises an immediate question. What is being hidden, and why? To answer this, it is important to understand the purpose of redaction. Redactions are used to protect information that cannot be publicly disclosed, even when the document itself becomes accessible. This includes a wide range of material, such as personal identifying details, sensitive communications, information related to ongoing investigations, legally protected content. Each redaction reflects a decision. Before a document is released, it is reviewed by legal authorities who determine which parts can be made public and which must remain hidden. This process ensures that transparency is balanced with legal and ethical obligations. Another key point is that redaction does not remove information from the case. The full, unredacted version still exists within the legal system. Judges, attorneys, and authorized parties may have access to it. What the public sees is a filtered version. This creates two layers of reality. The complete internal record, the partially visible public record. Understanding this distinction is critical. Redactions do not indicate that information is unimportant. In many cases, the opposite is true. The most sensitive or significant details are the ones most likely to be hidden. There is also the concept of visibility through absence. Even when text is removed, the structure of the document remains. The placement, length, and frequency of redactions can provide indirect clues about the underlying content. This is why redactions are often described as hiding information in plain sight. The document is visible, but not fully readable. And that partial visibility invites interpretation. However, interpretation must be approached carefully. Redacted sections cannot be assumed to contain any specific type of information without supporting context. The purpose of redaction is to limit certainty, not to suggest conclusions. This leads to an important understanding. Redactions are not gaps, they are intentional boundaries within the document. They define what can be known publicly and what must remain restricted. Redactions are not applied arbitrarily. Every removed word, line, or section is the result of specific legal justifications that determine what information can be disclosed and what must remain hidden. At the core of this process is a balance between transparency and protection. Courts recognize the importance of public access to legal records. At the same time, they are required to protect certain types of information that cannot be responsibly released. Redaction is the mechanism that allows both goals to coexist. One of the primary reasons for redaction is privacy protection. Legal documents often contain personal information, names, addresses, identifying details, or sensitive personal references. If individuals are not central to the case, or if disclosure could cause harm, that information may be removed. Another major factor is ongoing investigations. If a document contains details related to unresolved matters, releasing that information could interfere with investigative processes. Redacting those sections helps preserve the integrity of ongoing work. There is also the issue of legal privilege. Certain communications are protected by law, such as those between attorneys and clients. Even if such material appears in a document, it cannot be disclosed publicly. Redaction ensures that these protections remain intact. Another important consideration is fair trial rights. Courts must ensure that released information does not prejudice legal proceedings. If disclosing certain details could influence witnesses, jurors, or the outcome of related cases, those sections may be withheld. This reflects a key principle. The legal system is designed not only to reveal information, but also to control how and when it is revealed. There is also the factor of third-party protection. Legal documents can reference individuals who are not directly involved in the central issues of the case. Revealing their identities may be unnecessary or inappropriate, leading to redaction. In some cases, redactions are applied to protect sensitive methods or sources. This can include how information was obtained, who provided it, or the structure of investigative processes. Protecting these elements helps maintain the effectiveness of legal and investigative systems. Another layer involves legal compliance. Courts must follow laws and regulations that govern disclosure. These rules can vary depending on jurisdiction, case type, and the nature of the information involved. This creates a structured framework. Redactions are not decisions made in isolation. They are guided by established legal standards and obligations. It is also important to understand that redaction is often precise. Rather than removing entire documents, courts typically limit redactions to the specific portions that require protection. This allows as much information as possible to remain visible. The result is a carefully edited document. What remains is accessible, while what is removed is restricted for defined legal reasons. Understanding these legal foundations leads to a clear conclusion. Redactions are not about hiding information without reason. They are about protecting information that cannot be disclosed within the rules of the legal system. Redactions may appear as simple blacked-out lines, but their application follows a structured and methodical process. Understanding how they are applied helps explain not only what is hidden, but also how much information still remains visible. The process begins with document review. Before any record is released, it is examined line by line. Legal professionals identify specific portions that meet the criteria for redaction, whether due to privacy, legal privilege, or other protections discussed earlier. This review is not general. It is targeted and precise. Rather than removing entire sections without distinction, reviewers isolate the exact words, names, or phrases that must be concealed. This ensures that the rest of the document can remain accessible. Once identified, these portions are visually obscured. In most cases, redactions appear as black bars covering text. However, the formatting of the document remains intact. Paragraphs, spacing, and structure are preserved, even when content is hidden. This creates an important effect. The shape of the information remains, even when the content does not. For example, the length of a redacted section may indicate whether a single word, a sentence, or an entire paragraph has been removed. While this does not reveal the content itself, it provides a sense of scale and placement. Another aspect of application is consistency. If a specific type of information is redacted, such as a name or identifying detail, it is typically redacted throughout the document wherever it appears. This prevents indirect identification through repetition. There is also the use of labels and markers. In some documents, redactions are accompanied by notes indicating the reason for removal, such as privacy protection or legal privilege. These markers provide context without revealing the hidden content. This reinforces transparency within limitation. The reader knows why something is hidden, even if they cannot see what is hidden. Another important point is layered redaction. In complex cases, documents may undergo multiple rounds of review. Initial redactions may be revised, expanded, or reduced depending on legal developments. This means that the same document can exist in different versions over time. Each version reflects a different stage of disclosure. There is also the technical aspect. Proper redaction is not just visual, it must ensure that the hidden text cannot be recovered through digital means. This requires specific methods to permanently remove the underlying content, not just cover it. This highlights the seriousness of the process. Redaction is not cosmetic, it is legally binding and technically enforced. At the same time, the preserved structure of the document allows for partial interpretation. Readers can observe where information is missing, how often redactions occur, and how they relate to the surrounding text. This creates a form of indirect visibility. However, this visibility has limits. The structure may suggest patterns, but it cannot confirm content. Any conclusions drawn from redaction patterns must remain carefully restrained. Understanding how redactions are applied leads to a key insight. Even when information is hidden, the document still communicates, through its structure, consistency, and selective visibility. When reviewing redacted documents, one of the most noticeable features is not just the presence of blacked-out text, but how those redactions are distributed. Patterns, repetition, and clustering can shape how a document is perceived, even when the actual content remains hidden. At first glance, redactions may seem uniform. However, when examined closely, differences begin to emerge. Some sections may contain isolated redactions, while others may show dense clusters where multiple lines or entire paragraphs are obscured. This variation is significant. It reflects how information is organized within the document and which parts require greater protection under legal standards. For example, a single redacted word may indicate the removal of a name or identifier. In contrast, a block of continuous redaction may suggest a passage containing multiple protected elements, such as detailed descriptions, communications, or sensitive context. This leads to pattern recognition. Readers naturally begin to observe where redactions appear most frequently. Are they concentrated around specific sections? Do they occur near certain types of content? Are they repeated in similar formats? These observations can create impressions, even without revealing actual information. Another important factor is consistency across documents. If similar redaction patterns appear in multiple files, it may indicate that the same type of information is being protected repeatedly. This reinforces the idea that redactions follow rules, not randomness. There is also the concept of structural emphasis. When large portions of a document are redacted, those sections often draw more attention than fully visible text. The absence becomes visually dominant, shaping how the document is read. This creates a paradox. The more that is hidden, the more attention that section may receive. However, interpretation must remain controlled. Patterns can suggest where sensitive information exists, but they cannot confirm what that information is. The legal purpose of redaction is to prevent certainty, even when structure is visible. Another layer to consider is contextual placement. Redactions that appear near key sections, such as testimony, timelines, or communications, may influence how those sections are perceived. Readers may assume increased importance based on proximity alone. But proximity is not proof. It is simply a reflection of how the document is organized and what portions required protection. There is also the issue of overinterpretation. Because redactions invite curiosity, there is a natural tendency to assign meaning to their patterns. Without supporting evidence, this can lead to conclusions that go beyond what the document actually shows. This is why restraint is essential. Redaction patterns are informative in terms of structure, not content. Understanding this distinction helps maintain accuracy. Ultimately, patterns and clusters of redactions demonstrate that even in absence, documents still communicate. They reveal how information is distributed, where sensitivity lies, and how legal protections are applied. But they do so without revealing the underlying details. One of the most challenging aspects of reading redacted documents is not just what is hidden, but how the remaining visible text is affected by those omissions. Redactions do not exist in isolation. They directly influence the meaning of the surrounding content. When parts of a sentence are removed, the result is fragmentation. A statement that was once complete becomes partial. Keywords, names, or descriptions may be missing, leaving behind a structure that is grammatically intact but contextually incomplete. This creates interpretive difficulty. Readers are left to understand the visible portions without access to the full meaning. The sentence may suggest a connection, an action, or a sequence, but without the redacted elements, that meaning cannot be fully confirmed. Another important factor is directional context. The visible text before and after a redaction can provide clues about the type of information that has been removed. For example, a redaction placed between two names or within a timeline may indicate a missing link or detail. However, these are only structural clues, not definitive explanations. The risk lies in assumption. Because the human mind naturally tries to complete incomplete patterns, there is a tendency to fill in the gaps. This can lead to interpretations that go beyond what the document actually supports. This is especially important in complex cases. When multiple redactions appear within the same section, the surrounding text can become increasingly fragmented. The reader may see only pieces of a larger narrative, without the ability to fully reconstruct it. Another key point is loss of relational meaning. In unredacted text, relationships between individuals, events, or actions are often clearly defined. Redactions can remove the elements that establish those relationships, leaving behind references that are difficult to connect. This weakens clarity. Even though the document remains partially visible, its ability to communicate a complete idea is reduced. There is also the issue of selective visibility. Certain details are allowed to remain, while others are removed. This selective exposure can create an uneven understanding, where some aspects of a situation are clear and others are entirely absent. This imbalance shapes interpretation. Readers may focus on what is visible, without fully accounting for what has been removed. Another complication is sequence disruption. In narrative sections, such as timelines or testimony, redactions can interrupt the flow of information. Events may appear disconnected or transitions may seem abrupt. This further limits comprehension. Understanding these effects leads to a key conclusion. Redactions do not just hide information, they alter the way visible information is understood. The document becomes a partial representation, where meaning must be approached with caution. It is not enough to read what is present. One must also recognize the influence of what is missing. Redactions are not confined to a single document. In large cases, similar redactions can appear across multiple files, creating patterns that extend beyond any one record. These repetitions do not reveal specific content, but they do shape how the broader set of documents is understood. At first, each document may seem independent. However, when reviewed together, certain similarities begin to emerge. Redactions may occur in comparable locations, follow similar formats, or appear alongside the same types of visible text. This creates cross-document patterns. For example, a name or identifying detail that is redacted in one document may also be redacted in others, even if the surrounding context changes. This consistency reflects a shared legal decision about what must remain hidden. Another important factor is frequency. If redactions appear repeatedly across many documents, they draw attention, not because of what they show, but because of how often they occur. Repetition can suggest that a particular category of information is consistently protected. However, repetition does not equal confirmation. It indicates that the same type of content is being withheld, not what that content specifically is. There is also the issue of alignment. When redactions appear in similar positions within different documents, such as within communications, timelines, or references, it can create a sense of structural connection between those records. This can influence interpretation. Readers may begin to see relationships between documents based on these patterns, even though the underlying details remain hidden. Another layer is progressive comparison. As more documents are unsealed over time, patterns become more visible. Early releases may show isolated redactions, while later releases reveal consistency across a larger set of records. This leads to cumulative perception. Understanding develops not from a single document, but from comparing many documents over time. There is also the role of standardized redaction rules. Courts and legal teams often apply consistent criteria when deciding what to redact. This means that similar information is treated in the same way across different documents. This consistency reinforces the patterns that readers observe. Another important point is interpretive limitation. Even when patterns are clear, they do not provide direct answers. They show that something is being consistently protected, but they do not reveal what that something is. This distinction is critical. Patterns suggest structure, not content. There is also the potential for misinterpretation through accumulation. As patterns become more noticeable, there may be a tendency to assign meaning to them beyond what the documents support. Without direct evidence, this can lead to conclusions that are not grounded in the visible record. Understanding repetition across documents leads to a key insight. Redactions, when viewed collectively, create a form of indirect consistency. They show how information is systematically protected across the legal record. But they do so without breaking the boundary of confidentiality. Redactions are not only shaped by legal rules, they are also influenced by legal strategy and deliberate disclosure decisions. While courts define what must be protected, legal teams play a role in how information is presented within those limits. This introduces the concept of controlled disclosure. Not all information is treated equally. Some details are fully visible, some are partially revealed, and others are completely hidden. These outcomes are the result of both legal requirements and strategic choices. Attorneys must decide how to present information in a way that supports their case while still complying with redaction rules. This leads to selective visibility. For example, A document may include certain names, dates, or events in clear text, while closely related details are redacted. The visible portions provide structure, but the hidden portions limit full understanding. This balance is intentional. It allows a document to remain legible and useful, without disclosing restricted information. Another key factor is narrative control. Legal teams aim to present a coherent and focused version of events. Redactions can help maintain that clarity by removing details that are unnecessary, sensitive, or potentially distracting from the main argument. This does not mean information is altered, it means its presentation is refined within legal boundaries. There is also the issue of risk management. Revealing too much information can introduce legal or reputational risks. Even when disclosure is technically allowed, attorneys may choose to limit exposure to avoid unintended consequences. This creates a cautious approach. Information is not only evaluated for legality, but also for its potential impact. Another important aspect is negotiation and approval. In some cases, the scope of redaction is discussed between legal parties and reviewed by the court. This process can influence how much information remains visible in the final released version. This reinforces that redaction is not a single-step action. It is a collaborative and reviewed process. There is also the concept of context preservation. Even when parts of a document are redacted, enough information is often left visible to maintain a basic understanding of the material. This ensures that the document still serves its purpose within the public record. However, that understanding remains partial. Another layer is asymmetry of information. Different parties involved in a case may have access to more complete versions of documents than the public does. This means that what is visible externally may not reflect the full scope of what is known internally. This distinction is critical. It highlights that public documents are curated versions of a larger body of information. Understanding legal strategy in redactions leads to a key conclusion. Redactions are not only about what must be hidden, they are also about how the remaining information is shaped and presented. They define both absence and presence. Redactions are not always permanent. In many cases, what is hidden at one stage of a legal process may become visible later. This change is driven by unsealing decisions and evolving legal conditions. At any given moment, a redacted document reflects the current state of the case. Information is withheld based on active concerns, such as ongoing proceedings, privacy protections, or unresolved legal matters. As these conditions change, the justification for certain redactions may no longer apply. This creates the possibility of updated disclosure. Documents can be re-released in new versions, where some previously redacted sections are partially or fully revealed. These updates are not automatic, they require legal review and approval. This leads to versioned records. The same document may exist in multiple forms over time. An initial release with extensive redactions. A later version with reduced redactions. In some cases, a nearly complete version. Each version reflects a different stage of legal accessibility. Another important factor is trigger events. Changes in redaction status often occur after specific developments, such as the conclusion of a trial, the resolution of related cases, court rulings on disclosure requests, formal motions to unseal additional material. These events reduce the risks associated with disclosure, making more information eligible for release. There is also the role of legal reassessment. Courts periodically review whether existing redactions are still necessary. If the reasons for protection, such as privacy or investigative sensitivity, are no longer valid, those sections may be unredacted. This reflects a dynamic process. Redaction is not a one-time decision, it is subject to revision over time. Another key point is partial revelation. Even when redactions are reduced, they are not always removed entirely. Some sections may remain hidden permanently due to legal protections that do not expire. This creates a layered outcome. Some information becomes visible, while other details remain restricted indefinitely. There is also the issue of interpretive change. When new information is revealed, it can alter how previously released documents are understood. Context that was missing before may now clarify earlier material. This reinforces the importance of timeline awareness. Understanding when information becomes available is essential for interpreting its meaning accurately. Another factor is public re-engagement. Updated releases often renew attention, leading to reanalysis of both old and new material. This can shift focus and reshape understanding over time. However, limitations remain. Even with multiple rounds of unsealing, the public record may never be fully complete. Some information may always remain behind redactions due to permanent legal protections. Understanding this leads to a key conclusion. Redactions are not fixed, they are time-dependent, shaped by changing legal conditions and decisions. What is hidden today may be visible tomorrow, but not everything will be revealed. As redacted documents enter the public domain, they do more than present information. They shape how that information is interpreted over time. Because redactions limit visibility, they also introduce uncertainty, and that uncertainty becomes part of the narrative itself. At first, attention focuses on what is visible. Readers examine the available text, identify key sections, and attempt to understand the document as a whole. But very quickly, attention shifts to what is missing. The redacted portions begin to influence interpretation. This creates a dual layer of perception. What can be clearly read? What is visibly hidden? Both layers shape understanding. Another important factor is interpretive gap. Redactions interrupt the flow of information, leaving incomplete sequences and unresolved connections. Readers may attempt to bridge these gaps, using surrounding context to infer meaning. However, inference is not confirmation. This distinction is critical, yet often blurred in public discussion. There is also the issue of focus amplification. Redacted sections tend to draw more attention than visible ones. The absence becomes visually dominant, leading observers to assign greater importance to the hidden material. This creates a paradox. The less that is shown, the more attention it receives. Another factor is evolving interpretation. As documents are updated or additional materials are released, earlier assumptions may be challenged or revised. What once seemed significant may change when new context becomes available. This makes understanding fluid. There is no single, fixed interpretation, only a series of developing perspectives over time. Another key point is difference between legal meaning and public perception. In legal terms, redactions serve specific purposes, protecting privacy, ensuring fairness, and maintaining compliance with rules. In public discourse, however, redactions may be viewed as indicators of hidden significance. This creates a disconnect. The legal function of redaction is structured and defined, while public interpretation is often open-ended and influenced by visibility. There is also the role of selective exposure. Not all documents receive equal attention. Certain files or sections may become widely discussed, while others remain largely unnoticed. This uneven focus can shape which redactions are considered important. This further contributes to narrative formation. Over time, discussions about redacted material can become part of the broader story surrounding a case, even when the underlying content remains unknown. Another important consideration is permanent uncertainty. Some redactions may never be lifted. This means that certain gaps in the record are not temporary, they are built into the structure of what can be publicly known. Understanding this leads to a key conclusion. Redactions do not just limit information. They shape long-term interpretation by defining what remains uncertain. They create boundaries not only in documents but in understanding itself. After examining how redactions are applied, structured, repeated, and interpreted, a clear conclusion emerges. Redactions are not simply about hiding information. They are about controlling how information exists within the public record. They operate within a carefully defined system. This system is built on legal rules, strategic decisions, and procedural boundaries, all working together to determine what can be seen and what must remain hidden. At every stage, information is filtered. First, there is the creation of the record, documents, testimony, and evidence are collected. Then comes legal review, where sensitive material is identified. Next is redaction, where specific content is removed from the public version. Finally, there is release, where the document becomes accessible in a controlled form. Each step shapes visibility. This leads to a layered reality. The complete internal record, accessible to authorized parties. The public version, structured through redactions. Understanding this distinction is essential. Redactions do not erase information, they redefine its accessibility. Another key insight is the balance between transparency and restriction. Legal systems aim to provide public access while also protecting privacy, fairness, and procedural integrity. Redaction is the mechanism that allows both to exist at the same time. This balance is not perfect. It creates a situation where documents are visible, but not fully knowable. Information is present, but incomplete. This is where the idea of hidden in plain sight becomes most relevant. The document is available. The structure is visible. The absence is clear. But the content remains inaccessible. There is also the role of time. As legal conditions change, some redactions may be lifted, revealing additional information. However, not all hidden content will become visible. Some restrictions are temporary, others are permanent. This creates a dynamic but limited system of disclosure. Another important factor is interpretive responsibility. Because redacted documents contain both visible and hidden elements, they must be read with care. It is necessary to distinguish between what is explicitly shown, what is structurally implied, what remains unknown. Without this distinction, interpretation can move beyond what the document actually supports. There is also the broader implication. Redactions reveal not only information about a case, but about the legal system itself, how it manages sensitive material, how it prioritizes protection, and how it structures public access. In this sense, redactions are not just limitations. They are signals of where legal boundaries exist. In conclusion, redactions should be understood as intentional boundaries within public documents, tools for balancing openness and protection, indicators of sensitive or restricted information, structures that shape both visibility and interpretation. They do not provide full answers. But they define the limits within which answers can exist. And within those limits, they reveal a deeper truth. What is hidden is not absent, it is deliberately placed beyond reach, while still leaving a trace of its existence in the structure of the record itself. The documents exist. The questions remain. This channel will continue examining what is public, and what is still hidden. If you value documented analysis over speculation, consider subscribing. More files coming.